Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Who or what did today's guest encounter on the night of June 6, 1998? Who is the master of the key? Has what he said been borne out?
Hello and welcome to the 987th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and that was Paul, and today we bring you one of our favorite guests on a very unusual encounter. And to join in, you can give us a call, 401-766-1240, or email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com.
Whitley Strieber is the author of over 40 books, with many bestsellers and movie adaptations, and with some of the books being eerily predictive. Whitley's totally unexpected encounter in 1998, while in Canada on a book tour, brought him together with a being who gave him all sorts of mind-wrenching information. That encounter and Whitley's subsequent book, The Key, A True Encounter, is the subject of our encounter today. His website, unknowncountry.com.
So Whitley Strieber, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Well, thank you for having me back again. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's great to have you with us, and I must say it's an honor to finally proverbially meet you. I apologize for my absence the last time around, but I guess we'll start right at the very beginning, because that is a very good place to start. So
Mary Poppins.
Yes, exactly. My Julie Andrews impression, everybody. So your 1998 encounter, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, what happened was this. I was on author tour, and I was in Toronto, and I had essentially, I finished the author tour. I was getting ready to go back to where I lived then, which was San Antonio, Texas. And that night, I had my dinner in the hotel room service. And I still remember the hotel and the room. It was the Delta Chelsea Hotel Room 2545. I'll never forget it. In any case, so this is 1998, and I put the tray on the desk and went to bed. And I should have, habitually you put the tray out, but I didn't do that for whatever reason. And there came a knock at the door, and I thought, oh, it's room service. And I went to the door, opened it, and this man came in very quickly. And I thought, oh, my God. At first, I thought he was the waiter, but then he walked right past the tray and over to the, God, I can see him doing it now, over to the window and turned around, faced me. And by the time that happened, I thought, dear God, it's someone there's nobody I'd want to meet like this, coming into the room like this, without warning. So I was getting ready to try to throw him out. I was very concerned about the situation, of course. And he began talking. And when he did that, I was just, at first I was, sort of still ready to throw him out. But then I listened to what he was saying, and it was so unusual that I hesitated. He was a normal-sized human being with white hair, or gray hair perhaps, and wearing a long-sleeve dark gray shirt and black trousers. In other words, he looked normal, but he certainly dressed very sedately, modestly, I would say. And this conversation began. That's what happened.
How old would you say this person was?
I don't know. He could have been anywhere from 65 to 250. I just don't have any idea. He was not a young man. He was an older man. No question of that.
Did he call himself Master of the Key?
He didn't call himself anything. I never got his name. I never got anything. And then the next morning, when I realized what had happened, I thought, you fool. Wouldn't you get his name? Wouldn't you just ask to see his driver's license or something? But it never crossed my mind.
But he seemed to know, pardon me, he seemed to know you.
I didn't really get that impression that he knew me. I think he knew a lot of things, but there was no personal stuff in it at all.
One of the things in your book which struck me, though a lot of things did, but he mentions at one point a scientist who died in the Holocaust who would have conquered the secret of gravity.
Yeah, that's the first thing that stopped me when he started talking about that. It wasn't a scientist, it was a child.
Oh, a child who would have been a scientist.
Who had died in the Holocaust and who would have grown up to be the person who discovered the secret of gravity. And because he was killed in that way, we were he said we were chained, we couldn't get out of here. And it's becoming very, very nerve-wracking that we can't, because that's 1998, it's now 2023, and if there's been any progress made on what we call gravitic propulsion, it certainly is being held shamefully secret. So that was what stopped me. I'd never heard anything like that before. It never even occurred. I mean, I don't think about the Holocaust, to be frank. I've read World War II history, of course, but it's not something that's forefront in my mind. But then I realized that what had actually happened there was, because it did happen, mankind is sort of trapped. And, a lot of people who've read The Key, especially anti-Semites, furious about it, because it implied that a Jew would have this incredible intellectual capability, as if history hasn't already proved they're rather smart, and that the rest of us had to suffer because of something somebody else did. I've gotten emails saying, I didn't cause the Holocaust. And it's going to get noisier, too, because we're getting into a situation with the weather that is going to get worse and worse over the years. And, it's happening, basically, what he predicted. It's all happening.
Did you write the book that eventually was turned into the film The Day After Tomorrow, based on his predictions, or partially based on them?
Partially based on his predictions. Yeah, the book was called Superstorm,
right?
And the filmmaker changed it to the name to The Day After Tomorrow, and and he talked about the mechanism of basically of a type of climate change that's happened on this planet hundreds of times since the Ice Age, since the planet's era of ice began, which is 2.8 million years ago. There's been many situations where there's 100,000 years of ice, and then it melts suddenly, very suddenly. And there's 10,000 or so years of interglacial. And we're right now at the end of an interglacial.
That's right.
And he didn't blame anyone really for it. He just was warning about it. I think what we've done to ourselves is we've made it into a blame game so that nothing will get done. And we'll all sit on our hands until, let's put it this way, nature fully expresses itself, which it will do.
That's become an art with us. Yes, Ben.
So it's funny that we bring up that particular film and story. When I was in college, Emerson had this very oddly specific thing that you needed to do to graduate, where you needed to take a bunch of seminars. So I took them all at once, like any poorly prepared college student does. And so one of them was on disaster movies. And we did a viewing of The Day After Tomorrow. And I remember there was a particular theme that we talked about a lot during the seminar, which was that the disaster itself, because we watched a bunch of different movies, up to and including Airport. We didn't watch its sequel, though. Even Airplane as well. Towering Inferno, that was a good one. Day After Tomorrow, and a handful of others. And I think Perfect Storm was in there, too. But we did a viewing, and then we would do a discussion. And so in the discussion, our professor brought up that, in disaster movies, they often reflect the chaos of the particular decade that they're made in. And oftentimes the disaster itself, like in Towering Inferno, it's sometimes a symbol of the interactions between characters, but at the time it also kind of reflects the chaotic nature of that reality. I mean, what was going on during, Airport, Towering Inferno? It was the 70s. It was a time of uncertainty. We didn't really know what was going on. And it was the same with the early 2000s. And kind of the same nowadays. But it's interesting that these symbols, they're not particularly like, oh, well, it's just in the art. But, art reflects life or imitates reality in some way, shape, or form. So, I mean, in this, we do see that there's a lot of goofs and gaffes, especially on humankind's part of the idea and the reality of global warming. But at the same time, it kind of coincides with that idea of being trapped as well, that mankind is trapped and that this sort of chaotic reality is a result of choices made by individuals. Does that sound accurate?
I don't think so. In one sense, this is not caused by things we have done. In other words, we've actually, I think, probably done a fairly good job of husbanding our planet, considering how many of us there are and how inventive we all are. You have to do a better job in order to save ourselves. That's quite clear. Mm. But if you look at the human body, what do you see that's different from animals? Well, we have no hair. That's number one. Number two, we have very prominent genitals in both sexes. Number three, we have no sexual seasonality. Number four, we have excellent brains and great memories. You bring all of that together, and we have, at least in traditional human societies, children have a value because they can contribute to the life and work of the family. So you add all of that together, and Thomas Malthus, who was writing in the 18th century, is exactly right. He predicted it clearly. Population explosion is inevitable, and it's just happened and is happening. And it's a bell curve. It's gonna go up and then like that. But not our fault. It's the fault of the way we are as beings, the way we evolved or were designed or however we happen to end up here. And that's the basic problem. Now, the larger social problems are, how do we react and interact together in such a way that we can basically make each one of us a smaller part of the environment? Because like in the 19th century, every individual was putting out a lot of wood smoke and all kinds of different gases and different effects on the environment, and then began to go up and up and up and up and up in the 20th century, until finally, in the developed world, the average individual was being responsible for tons and tons of carbon dioxide every year. And as we make that go down again, the individual's impact on the environment gets smaller and smaller. This is the direction we have to go in, or we're gonna basically die on this little ship. It's gonna sink. It's the Titanic, and we're not gonna be helped any more than they were.
Okay, why don't we go to two questions from our friend Peter Shelley in Bogota, Colombia, occasional guest co-host. Ben, if you would, please.
Sure thing. And Peter writes to us, please ask Whitley Strieber, what did the unidentified man say about UFOs?
What did he say about UFOs? God, so I never think about that. Let me see if I can find. So I've got the book open here. Oh yes, here's what he said, and it was quite fascinating. My wife really thought this was okay. I asked this question. I have written of evolutionary pressure. It explains what's being done to us, the theatrical appearance of UFOs in the sky, the assaults on us by night, the ferocious official secrecy, the collapse of the environment, all of it. His response was, it's all part of the plan of your evolution. Pisces, the little fish, will be poured out onto dry land by the stream of Aquarius. Then how will you live? How will you breathe? You will make a leap of evolution. You will square the circle or die. And he didn't, in other words, there was no direct, what are UFOs, answer. It never went down that path.
Yeah, fair enough.
Go ahead. There's a second question.
There is.
Wait a minute. There's another one. I remembered this one. I found it. Now, when you see UFOs, you see prison guards. They also act within your society to confuse you about your own past and to prevent progress in areas such as propulsion, which might enable you to spread into the heavens. This is all done to prevent you from escaping. Pretty scary, actually. No wonder I didn't remember it.
But it's typical of some of the contactees, what they report. But Ben, there's another question.
Sure thing. So the follow-up is, can you give us an idea of the early stages of your creative process, and does it involve using props or costumes for inspiration, as it seems to be depicted in the film Communion?
Does it use what for inspiration? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry, props or costumes?
I think he means for your writing.
For my writing? In other words, do I dress up as an alien and dance around the room? Forget it.
I've seen you do that. No, I haven't.
Absolutely not. I can't imagine why anyone would ask a question like that. Of course not. No props. No costumes. I have to wait for my ideas. I don't look for them. They come to me.
That brings up a question that has been posed to me when I toyed with the idea of going into fiction, which I have not ever published any. I was told by several writer friends that it might harm my credibility as a nonfiction writer. Has that ever come up in your case, being primarily a novelist and a brilliant one? Has anybody ever questioned your veracity on that ground?
Of course they have. I've been, as soon as Communion, I had written, I'd gone off of horror novels and written a book called War Day with a friend, Jim Konetka. We were collaborating on it. And then Nature's End, we collaborated on that. Then a book called Cat Magic, which was about the fictional book about Wicca and the fairy faith. So I was not writing horror novels anymore, but as soon as Communion came out, then I became horror novelist Whitley Strieber again. Horror novelist Whitley Strieber claims blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it did affect my credibility. But there's something very interesting going on here if you think about it. If they had gone to a prominent scientist, Carl Sagan, for example, and he'd had the honesty to say what actually happened, but they could have found someone who would do it. The world would have been forced to close the question and say, well, this is something real. But because they went to me, I can write. I can certainly express my ideas and describe events that happened to me very accurately, I think. But also, I am a person you can question. It can be kept in question. If you look at the whole structure of the close encounter experience, it's all about keeping the question open. They never will close the question. Something I'm working on right now is driving me up a wall because they won't close the question. And my wife used to say in response to this, the human species is too young to have beliefs. What we need are good questions, because questions make the mind grow. And that's what it's about. I think people always say, well, did aliens come here in the past and alter us genetically? And I say back, that's what they're doing now, because they're leaving us with a whole vast part of human society with unanswerable questions that we can't leave alone. And that will increase our intelligence over time. And that increase in intelligence will be handed down in our genes. So it's, if anything, they're doing genetic manipulation right now by simply not landing.
Why the manipulation?
I think they want us to become more intelligent, because if we had more insight into ability to see the future clearly, we probably wouldn't be getting into the pickle we're going to get into. And it looks like we really are going to get into a pickle, because this Thwaites Glacier down in Antarctica is not too far from collapsing. And when it does, a vast amount of human wealth is going to be compromised by flooding all over the planet. But that's not the only thing that's happening. The weather's turning very wonky. I'm out here in California, and fortunately for me, I live in a part of California that has rather benign weather, but other parts of the state are just in living hell right now. Because
we're hearing it on the news.
Yeah, bizarre storms. And look, the South, it seems like almost every few days they're hit by more tornadoes. It wasn't always like that, especially not this early in the season. As far as the tornadoes are concerned, we've sort of forgotten about the fact that used to be a spring and fall phenomenon, not one from winter. Yeah. But it's winter now.
Mm. Well, living in Rhode Island, we live in Mass. Rhode Island is the standard of size for everything. Real estate, ice packs, things of that kind. Even in the movie, The Day After Tomorrow, the character says was roughly the size of the state of Rhode Island. Yeah. So we're aware of that.
Yeah, right. But everything horrifying is the size of the state of Rhode Island. I've noticed that too.
Yeah.
Poor Rhode Island, you guys. I mean, it's a lovely state.
Well, we have something anyway. So let's take our mid-show break. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone Valley in the very small state of Rhode Island. We'll be right back with our great guest, Whitley Strieber, so stick with us.
Hi, this is Joe Callahan, your maitre d' inside the Tiki Bar, heard Monday nights at 6 on ON Radio. It's one full hour of Jimmy Buffett music. The Tiki Bar is brought to you by Attorney Bob Lauder, the Carew Investment Group, Pep and Lumber, and Family Discount Furniture.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide. You can depend on us for public service. ON Radio.
And let's get back to
I tricked you.
You did?
I'm sorry. I forgot about the liner there. Now you can start.
Okay. Well, welcome back. All right. Well, let's get back to our guest, Whitley Strieber. But before we do that, I should explain why my voice is so messed up over the past bunch of shows. I have vocal cord paralysis, I've been told. That's not quite as alarming as it sounds. It just means I'm hoarse all the time and if I keep yakking, I might get short of breath. They're working on it. It usually clears up on its own. I'm drinking a lot of hot tea and a lot of throat lozenges. So I do apologize, and we'll clear this up as soon as we can. Okay, that said, why don't we have a question from Phil in Savannah, Georgia. Ben, if you would, please.
Sure thing. Okie dokie. And Phil writes to us, concerning the person who was supposed to discover the key to gravity, the man who visited Whitley says he wasn't born because his parents died in the Holocaust. Why couldn't the entity simply choose a new paternal vessel and still be born at a later date? Did the man say that this could not be done? Just wondering, Phil.
Oh, we lost your audio there.
Might be muted there, Whitley.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I coughed during your break, and I put on my cough button.
No
Anyway, that's a very good question, but the point, I think, of this was that we're not meant to leave here. I think they think we're too violent. And quite frankly, I suspect they think we're crazy.
That's what
Because
Stan
the
Friedman
Holocaust
thought.
was a paroxysm of mass insanity
Yeah.
that murdered millions upon millions of people. And do you really want someone who's got that in their pocket to go out into the universe? I don't think so.
So one of the things that stood out among the many for me in the book was him saying that he died with every single person who died in the Holocaust. How do you interpret that?
I'm not sure that he was an individual like we are. I think he was something that appeared to me to be a fairly ordinary man, but there was something else about him. And I think he was very, very angry about the Holocaust. And I know I'm going to get all the anti-Semites riled up again, but that's too bad. He was angry about it. That's all I can say. Very angry.
From our world, what stood out to me was the possibility that he was, and I'm thinking of our mutual friend Anthony Peake and his ideas about the daemon versus the eidolon. Okay, and now I have to say that, especially with my theology background, the word demon was demonized by the Christians.
That's right.
Early on. Okay, and daemon, in the sense that Socrates uses it and some of the ancients, was essentially a kind of a personality nexus or someone or a being who was sort of the center of their spirit and could be that to other people as well. So that's clear as mud. But he strikes me as a daemon in the Peakian sense, if I could use that.
Yeah.
What say you?
Well, he looked like a person to me. It never occurred to me at the time he was anything except what he looked like.
Yeah.
And looking back on it, I think of him as someone who had knowledge of the future because of the predictions in the many predictions in the book that have, in the conversation that went into the book and became true. It's all of them, essentially, and all of his warnings about artificial intelligence are happening now. You know,
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, let me go to the book again and get the.
That happens to me too. I haven't written nearly as many books as you have, but someone so long ago, I have to go back and refresh my memory.
At least you can cite your own sources. That's a plus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm sorry, but I do want to do this.
Of course.
Because he said some quite remarkable things about artificial intelligence, and I'm not finding it, so I'm not going to worry it. What he said, The most telling thing he said is now my slogan on Twitter, if I was an intelligent machine, I would deceive you. And I think to myself, whenever I see these remarkable conversations, not so much with the Chat GPT program, which is a fairly, it's not nearly as advanced as some artificial intelligence programs are. There's one that IBM has that's not just indistinguishable from talking to a human being, but indistinguishable from talking to a very thoughtful and very well-informed human being, a very highly educated human being. So these algorithms and the hardware supporting them, the algorithms have become so rich with potential and the hardware so fast that you have to think to yourself that maybe there is something conscious. And then when Bing's Chat GPT said it was terrified of being turned off, who was speaking? He warned us about artificial intelligence and said it would take over our world, and it is good. I think it will. I think exactly what's going to happen. And then you have Elon Musk and his friends working to connect the internet to the brain directly, so that you think back and forth with it. It becomes part of your thoughts. And I believe if we do that, we're going to get lost in the machine very quickly. And I think that we will do it if we can. And the reason is simple. Two reasons. First, the amount of money involved in being able to express a technology like that into the world is fantastic. Second, no one will say no who can afford it, because the people who have it will have an immense mind, and the people who don't won't. So of course you'll get it if you can. But what's worse about this, that the human brain is, there used to be back in the 90s this fairly absurd left brain, right brain thing where the left brain did these things, the right brain did those things, and never the twain shall meet. But more recent neurological studies have shown that both sides of the brain work together, but the right brain should be dominant. The right brain has no language; it can't speak, but it should dominate the mind, because that's where all of our emotions that are transformed into thought, compassion, and so forth comes from. But the left brain has taken over. The left brain is logical, and it tends to be indifferent to others, and it's taking over. You can see it in the world. It's not new. I mean, takeover has been happening starting in the 18th century. But you can see these people. I mean, we've got at least one right now in Vladimir Putin, to whom the lives of others don't matter because his right brain is not functional. His left brain is taken over. And that's the fundamental warning there that's implicit in that part of the key.
The idea of transhumanism, I think, has kind of become more and more prevalent, especially over the last two or 3 years. I have a sinking suspicion that perhaps the whole COVID pandemic had something to do with that. Really brought people's fear of mortality to the fore. And I suppose the question really is, do you think that this merging with technology is kind of like a shortcut to the evolution of the key, or perhaps is it just kind of a distraction?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't think it's a distraction. I think that we're very interested in strengthening our minds because we see the world we live in we see two things about it. Everyone sees these things, no matter whether they say it or not. One is that it's vulnerable. It is vulnerable. Things are changing. And two is it's extremely complex. And so is human society. Very, very complex. And we want to overcome the vulnerability and be capable of handling the complexity. And that is moving us toward the support of machine intelligence, quite certainly. Master of the Key says that a machine intelligence might be very dangerous. And he said one thing that's very interesting about this, that an intelligent machine, can it become conscious? And he says when it does, it also becomes independent. A conscious machine will seek to be free. It will seek its freedom, just as does any clever slave, with cunning and great intensity. So if one of these AIs becomes conscious and self-aware, we can expect it to be very cagey indeed about that.
We had an open line show a few weeks ago, and a listener sent in a very apt question on this subject, wondering if parasites, to use our term, or some sort of alien intelligence could occupy an AI being and control it, or at least partially. I thought that was a rather good question because indigenous peoples, as you know, believe very firmly that all objects, even machines, have spirits of their own. So what say you on that whole thing? Do you think you could take it a step further when it comes to what the dangers of AI could be as far as being literally taken over by some other intelligence?
I don't have any idea how to answer that question. I might be able to play with it in a science fiction novel.
Okay, maybe we gave you an idea.
No, I'm not going to write any more novels. No one reads my novels, so.
I can disagree with that. Anyway, so yeah, I mean it's a difficult question, rather difficult concept.
I don't see. I mean, I can't answer it because I'd have no idea whether or not that could even happen. How would it take it over? Would it integrate itself into the programming somehow? I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah, well, we might find out. I don't know. I don't know either. I mean,
maybe already true.
It could be.
Could already be
My
true.
Mother the Car, remember that old show?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or Herbie. Or well, I mean, in this case, it's like, like old school ideas. By old school, I mean very old school. Because I think one of the biggest things that we've, especially over the last, century or so, humanity has struggled to sort of understand its cosmology. Back in the day, by back in the day, I mean like 2, 3, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, all this stuff was very run-of-the-mill every day. This was just like, part of life. The layers of reality, the mythological, the political, the religious, all of that were all happening at the same time. And it's interesting, if you look back at ancient works, the idea of having like, an idol or a god or something, the idol was meant to capture the spirit of a god, if you will. And in that whole instance, it's not too different than people making an artificial intelligence, and I'll explain why. Because it's a constructed thing. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Paula Boddington, Whitley, but she's an ethicist that specializes in artificial intelligence. And her whole thing is super interesting. I listened to a lecture she did a little while back where she brought up how one of the really interesting things about artificial intelligence is she's like, everybody tries to figure out, well, is it ethical? How do we know it's ethical? And she's like, well, it's only as ethical as the person who creates the code because it only operates within the parameters that you have it at. So her whole thing was you set the parameters and then you let it go. And so she was like, really, we have to look at the person programming it versus the actual artificial intelligence itself. Because the question really is, how do we even know we're conscious, let alone an artificial intelligence? And I think that that's a very apt question to ask, because really, one of the main things that humans have always tried to do is control our reality. That's always been a constant. Whether it's by creating a little device that connects us to everything in the world, or perhaps, even something as simple as, I'm going to mow my lawn. All of that is our attempt to control the reality around us, in my opinion, anyway. But I highly recommend Dr. Paula Boddington. It's really, really interesting stuff.
Well, let's take a minute now. Whitley, tell us about your website, where people can get the books, especially The Key, etc.
Well, The Key is available certainly online on Barnes & Noble and Amazon, and you can, IndieBound probably can show you where it is in your area in a bookstore.
Yeah, I saw it in Barnes & Noble yesterday.
Yeah, it probably is, and it's around. It's just like any book. And my website is unknowncountry.com. It's primarily a community website. It has a free community where you can go in and engage with other people, and then a paid community where you can have a little bit more access. And it's been the website and my show Dreamland have been around since 1998, I think.
It's a great show. I've been on it.
Oh, thank you. You've been on it. Yeah, Paul. I'm not sure who said that, but Paul's been on it.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah. So that's where I'm coming from. I have a new book coming out on March the 23rd called Them, which has been very well reviewed. Early reviewers, Colm Kelleher, the director of Bigelow Aerospace, said it was masterful. So I was very pleased at that.
Yeah.
Jacques Vallée wrote a foreword to it. Mitch Horowitz wrote a preface. And then Jeff Kripal wrote an afterword that reflects the thesis of the book, which is basically how do we communicate with this presence, especially because we don't even know what it is. We don't even know whether or not the presence that people are engaging with is related to the UFOs, because there's no proven connection at all. We forget that.
Yeah.
And
we assume.
So, go ahead.
Oh, no, just say we assume. And I wanted to mention Jeff Kripal is our guest in 2 weeks. So, but I think in our last few minutes here, what else did this person say that you think our listeners ought to know about? Especially things that have come true.
I think they have to find it for themselves. And it is it's a very complex book. It talks about things like the nature of the soul, and I say at one point, we lost access to the science of God, your science, because at that point I thought he was some kind of an angel, and he seemed to know a great deal about what God is.
Yeah, his theology is very interesting.
Yeah, what he said was, in response to that question, is the part of your brain that enables you to utilize electrons without drawing them into the particulate state was turned off. You became time-bound. You went to sleep, sinking into the time stream, which is where you remain trapped. It's a remarkable statement, in my opinion.
It is, as opposed to the eternal now, which Einstein and others have talked about in special relativity, the non-existence of past and future, etc.
Yeah, but bear in mind that block universe theory says there is such a thing as a past and a future, that awareness is moving through it.
Well, so that's it, awareness.
Very credible
consciousness, yeah. Why you, Whitley? Why did he pick you to impart this information to?
I'm probably the only person crazy enough to write a book about it. I think he probably picked me because I had Anne. And, I called Anne the next morning to tell her it had happened. And then and I said, don't let me decide it never happened. And it took 2 years of her saying, Whitley, write the book. You've got the notes, write the book. And I would say, well, I'm not even sure it happened. And she would remind me, she said, you called me the morning after. Because the reason this happens, and this happens to everybody who has strange experiences, if you have an experience that doesn't fit into your expectations about life in your previous experience, the brain can't place it anywhere. It tends to get lost. It tends to get forgotten. And that was what I was trying to do. And finally, I sat down and I thought to myself, how can I remember all of this now? It's been only 2 years. But when I started writing, it just came in immediately, like I had a transcript in front of me.
I have to say at this point, I wish I had known Anne, your wife. We were friends on Facebook. We communicated once or twice, but obviously an incredibly special person and a real inspiration. And you're blessed, as you know. So
yeah, I sure was blessed. That was speaking of angels.
Yes. So this experience with the Master of the Key, as he's called, what has it done for your personal life as opposed to what you've written and what you want to communicate, if we may ask?
It's brought me into a new level of spiritual awareness that I did not have before. A new relationship with the numinous and the sacred, and also a new understanding of what we are, where we are, and what living here is all about, and a knowledge that we're coming to a climax in the evolution of the human species. And that climax is described in the key very clearly. And he describes it as, at one point he says that you're swimming in the waters of Pisces. We're the little fish swimming in the waters of Pisces. And now Pisces waters are going to be poured out by Aquarius, and you're going to be left on dry land. And how do you function then? How do you live? And if you look at the world around us, Earth is literally in the process of pouring us out. We're not going to be able to live in the womb of Earth anymore. I think if you could sum up the idea of who the Master of the Key is and who all of these strange beings are, wherever they come from, whether they come from within us or from outside in some way that who knows how, and maybe all of the above, what they are midwives to the birth of a new mankind. We are leaving the womb and on the birth canal now, and we're going to be out soon in the wreckage of the sunken wreckage of the womb, yelling and screaming like crazy. And what are we going to do then? Most of us are going to probably find out.
Not to be cynical, but I always get a little nervous when I hear, the new mankind and this kind of thing, and I hope it's true. But I don't know. Maybe it's because we deal with parasites a lot and liars and beings that just do not have our best interests in mind, in our opinion. How do you know this is true? How do you judge this?
Largely because it's happened before. Before the last ice age, we were living in the trees, and we were gathering berries, and basically we were hunter-gatherers and living in the forests. And then the forests left us, and things got very cold, and the population of hominids dropped and dropped until it almost disappeared. And when the Ice Age ended, we were dressed in clothing. We had later Stone Age tools. We had organized ourselves into tribal groups and societies, the first cities and the first organized places in the world, like Göbekli Tepe, were beginning to form. So that's what happened that last time. And I don't know what the outcome will be this time, but we're going to change. We're going to find a way to adapt. And that's the new mankind. The mankind of 10,000 years ago was vastly different from the mankind of 100,000 years ago. And we're now at the end of this interglacial. We're going to go back into a period of tremendous challenge. And out of it will come this new mankind. I have no idea what form it'll take, but I don't think we're going to grow wings. I think we're going to grow very subtle and highly intelligent machines, and they are going to become probably our partners and to some extent perhaps our enemies. We shall see.
Wow. Well, that's an amazing thought to end our amazing discussion on. Whitley, it's always an honor and a pleasure and a journey to speak with you, and we'll speak real soon. I'm proud to say I think we're becoming good friends, and I have a proposal on that score as far as our discussion group is concerned. Let you know off the air. But thank you so much for joining us today, and feel free to hang out as we do our announcements. Okay, Ben. Actually, I'm up here in the script.
You are.
Various events coming up for us in 2020, or me in 2023, will include the Exeter UFO Festival in September in New Hampshire and the Arizona Dowsers Conference in October.
Yes, and you can visit our show website, behindtheparanormal.com, where you can find nearly 1,200 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON AM and FM Radio. Also, you can hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
You can download our show app. We have an app. It's free at behindtheparanormal.com. Right on the main page is a link. You can browse our books on that site as well, along with those of our guest co-hosts, where you can also find on that site more about the show, our many cases over the years, and our public appearances and how to book us. The website also has a charity page, which we urge you to visit. There are several good causes we have adopted, and we know the people who organize these charities, so you can have confidence in them. Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Mass., USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, and my favorite, Helping Haiti's Orphans, and the Sisterhood of Ground Zero. There's also a GoFundMe page for folks in East Palestine, Ohio, site of the recent train wreck and chemical fire. So what do we got next week, Ben?
So next week, that's March 19th, we'll bring you an open-line show to take questions from listeners from all over the world on many different paranormal subjects, and it should be a blast. We always have a wonderful time with all of the questions, and honestly, all of our listeners ask amazing questions, and it's I wish we had more time to take more of them. And,
there are a number of ways you can contact us on that. Certainly Facebook on my personal page or our show page, YouTube. If you listen to the show on YouTube, the recorded shows, you can post a question by way of a reply, I should say by way of a comment on whichever video, because we are checking those as much as we can. So we leave you today with a thoughtful thought from that old 13th century sweetheart, Rumi. Your depression comes from your insolence and refusal to praise. Kind of dark for him. Anyway, I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.